Welcome to the Inland Valley Storytellers Monthly Story Swap May. My name is John Sinclair. I am your Inland Valley Storytellers and also your Zoom host. So I think most people know everybody here, but I see someone has joined who hasn't been here in a while, and we have some people who maybe have not met him. So I'm going to pass this around. And then I'm going to have the people on Zoom introduce themselves. So my name is John St. Clair, and I live in Ontario.
Hello, yeah. Say I go by Smitty sometimes, and hello. It's up in Running Springs area, so I'm up in the mountains. And anyhow, so whoop-de-doo, here's another person.
Well, I don't go by Smitty, although I like that name quite a bit, actually. They've called me Boom Boom on the tennis court and the Glenster. But most people in this group, I haven't been called both of those in a while, but most people in this group just realize I'm Glenn Grant and I live in Claremont.
I'm Kristen somewhere there. And I live in Ontario.
And I'm Nick Smith, and I currently live in North Hollywood.
No nickname?
No,
No.
nothing matching those.
Well, his first name is Nick. You
Yes.
don't need a nickname.
Right.
He has one already.
Nick has a nickname.
Yes.
Long story.
So
Okay,
I'm
so
Adrian, and I'm out here in sunny inland Riverside.
Okay, and let's see, let's have Walt, introduce yourself. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Got to unmute yourself.
Or you could do the entire thing.
You're still muted.
Yeah, it didn't work.
Oh, there we go. Now try it.
No, I still don't hear it. Do you guys hear it?
No.
Can't you?
Huh.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, let me have somebody else introduce, and you keep working on the sound. Well, normally, yes. Okay, and now we'll put the spotlight on Ron. Introduce.
Ron Evans. I live at Pilgrim Place in Claremont.
Okay, and then that's me. Still working on it, Walt? Well, I will introduce Walt. That's what he looks like. Yeah, he's used it before. Okay. This is Walt Roth, and he lives in Riverside. And he was quite a regular in our Zoom meetings during COVID, but he hasn't been on for a while. And so I didn't know whether, Maynard, you had ever met Walt before. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Hello.
That's why I have people do introductions. So hopefully Walt gets that fixed, particularly if he had a story to tell. I'm going to take the spotlight off. And who would like to tell the first story? Anybody here?
No.
Well, I have something fairly short, John, which is uncharacteristic.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to hear.
Yeah, right. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
One of the things that you say about our gathering, which I appreciate because I take it literally, that we are welcome to not just present stories, but offer them as works in progress and try to get feedback from our colleagues about how they might be sharpened, improved, clarified, whatever. And this is a short story, which is a personal reminiscence of some years ago. And if it has have a title, which I think many stories are favored by having a title, this one would be Teamwork. Teamwork. In the year 1958, if you'll cast your minds back, she was only a year out of high school. The funds were always tight in her family. Her father was a teacher. Her mother was a secretary in a local insurance office, agency office. Her brother was away in the Navy, and she wanted very much to go to college. But that was going to be a stretch, not because she was not capable. She was extremely capable, but night school at a nearby community college was the only immediate option, at least as far as the economics were concerned. Do well, as she had always done in high school, and maybe with a scholarship then, she could go on to some small Ohio college, where Ohio was her state, obviously, and at that time there were more small colleges in Ohio per capita than any other state in the Union. With high regard for high grades and well-practiced skills, which she'd attained in high school, along with her mother's encourage and tutelage as a first-rate secretary, she got a good job, but not a well-paying job, as the part-time secretary. We'd say administrative assistant these days, but in those days it was referred to as secretary, to the director of the local YMCA in that small community. It was a community center in every way and a very popular place. She worked mornings only from 7 in the morning until 1, and was busy at her desk every morning well before 7 to get things in a good roll so that she could be well up to it as time began. Early mornings were her best time, and she could be most productive, she thought. And there were a few interruptions, but far fewer than there would be later on the day. So, say the morning swimmers would walk past were early morning, or exercise people or whatever. So there were some people would come by, but for the most part, it allowed her to do the tasks of, well, all the over-the-counter things that you would have to do, besides typing and filing and getting things arranged so that the man that she worked for could be at his best and all the more productive. That was really something that her mother taught her, that her responsibility was to make sure that whatever she did, it was to be to the advantage of her boss or her supervisor. In this case, to help him always be at his best. And so when she learned these attitudes, clearly her skills in this regard, again with her dear mother's tutelage, improved markedly. One particular morning, and it was shortly before 8 o'clock, the director came in and walked past her desk with a quick but cheerful good morning, and went on through to his adjoining office just behind hers. As he did, the office phone rang, and of course she answered it. Lakewood YMCA, good morning. How may I help you? She listened to the other voice and then responded, thank you. I'll put you through to his office. Obviously, it's someone who had asked for the director. She pressed the pause button, which some of us remember that phones used to have, and transferred the call to the director's desk and said privately on the intercom line, which the person calling could not hear, Mrs. Johnson is calling for you, sir. Slight pause, and then she added, you may have noticed in the paper today, her son Robert just received an appointment to West Point. It was granted by Senator Taft. And then she waited for her boss to press the button on his phone that would then connect him with the outside line of Mrs. Johnson waiting on the line, which he did. And so she hung up the phone and continued on with her duties. it could have been otherwise a difficult conversation. You see, Mrs. Johnson was the chair of the school board. And is there a good way to put this? Probably no. Not always an easy person to get along with, even in the best of times. She and the director had been having some long time back and forth, intense discussions. I would say argument, but intense discussions about her insistence that the YMCA pay a much higher fee of rental for after hours use of certain school playfields for their physical education activities, et cetera, et cetera. But with that brief cue from his wise beyond her years young secretary, the director was now in full control of the conversation. And his first words were obviously, good morning. But the next two words really sealed the deal. Good morning, Mrs. Eisenhower, he said. Remember, this was 1958. A very well-known West Point graduate himself, one Dwight David Eisenhower, was not only a five-star general, recently retired Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and NATO, but past president of Columbia University and just happened to be, in that year, the 34th president of the United States. Needless to add, that devoted and keenly focused young office secretary was able to help her boss get right into the lead of whatever conversation would ensue following. And hence the title of this brief but true story, Teamwork. Teamwork. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So why did he address her as Mrs. Eisenhower? Was that supposed to be a compliment?
Well, remember that her son had just been appointed to West Point. And with the president of the United States being one of the most well-known and distinguished graduates of West Point, making the association and referring to her with a relationship to the president, I think was a very favorable kind of thing for him to do. And I'm sure she caught on to that right away.
So the implication is perhaps her son might be one day a president?
Yes. Certainly. And he was acknowledging the fact of her importance.
Yes.
And addressing her in a rank higher than just chair of the Board of Education. And I think acknowledging the announcement that had just been made in the paper that morning. So trying to, I think, congratulate her and acknowledge that, and showing the appreciation for it, I hope put him in a, if not just advantage, at least on an even playing field with an otherwise very, very difficult woman. I think it did.
So was this a true story?
What is truth, as they say? Yes, it happened.
Okay.
And I know it happened for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Walt, have you got sound yet?
How about that?
Hey.
Yes. It's where he did. What was the problem?
Well, the problem was I couldn't even get on Zoom unless I updated to the latest version. So I put on the latest version and the audio didn't correspond with what I was using. So I used the headset and then chose that one because there was like a dozen different things to choose from. So now they're all coordinated. So I'm okay now.
Well, do you have a story tonight?
I do.
Okay, well, let me put the spotlight on you and you can tell us your story.
There we go.
Okay, this is a very short story. And it's a true story, I assume. It was written by a 12-year-old girl. And it's supposed to be something that really happened to her. And I will call her Donna. And I'll call the title Friendship. She was watching TV one Saturday morning with her little brother. Her dad was asleep in the next room, and her mom was out shopping for groceries. Her little brother had a new toy. It was one of these wooden paddles with a ball attached to a rubber band. And every time the commercials came on, he would hit this little ball with the paddle and see how many times he could keep it up in the air before he missed. During one of the commercials, Donna went into the kitchen to get something to drink. She opened up the fridge, was pouring herself a glass of orange juice, and just as she was about to take a sip, she heard a terrible crash. The first thing she did was go in to see if her dad woke up from the hearing of the noise, but he was still asleep. Then she rushed into the living room, and there was her little brother with the paddle in one hand and their mom's favorite vase on the floor in pieces, shattered. Her little brother was in terror. He was horrified. He knew he wasn't supposed to use that paddle in the house. And here he had broken their mom's favorite vase. And he just said, "Mom's going to kill me. Mom's going to kill me." Donna was very concerned about her little brother, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll help you." She told him to pick up the pieces and put them on the kitchen table. She ran into a cupboard and looked for some glue. She said, "I'm going to glue it together." But there were several kinds of glue. What kind of glue to use? She saw white glue, and she said, no, that's just for paper and cardboard and stuff like I used in school. Then she found a little tube of glue, and she was frantically trying to read the directions on the back to see if it glued a vase together. Well, it said it could glue porcelain and glass, so she figured that's probably will do the job. So she went into the table, sat down, and frantically tried to glue the pieces together. It was quite a little puzzle for her, but she was laying the glue on all the edges and carefully fitting them together. But she had to hurry because she never knew when her dad might wake up or when her mom was going to come home from grocery shopping. She glued them together and got most of the pieces all together, and she was feeling pretty good about what she was doing. And then she noticed that it was kind of sagging to one side. It wasn't quite the shape it was supposed to be in. And also the glue was kind of oozing between the pieces, and that was bothering her. But she kept on doing it until she finally got all the pieces together. Then she tried to stand up, and she discovered something to her horror. Her long black hair. She had been bending over this thing intently trying to glue it, and now her hair was glued to the vase and it would not come off. Oh, she was frantic now. So she picked up the vase, went into the next room, dug up a pair of scissors, and cut her hair off on that side. Then she was headed for the living room to put the vase back up on the table, and she would hope that Mom wouldn't notice that it had been shattered and glued back together. But just as she was crossing the living room floor, she heard the key hit the lock and turn. Oh no, that's Mom. Well, her little brother ran out of the room, went into his bedroom, and pretended to be asleep. The door opened, and there was Mom. She saw Donna with the vase in her hand, with all the glue, and she said, "You have ruined my vase." And she scolded her something terrible. She was very, very unhappy with her. She told her that she was going to have to go to her room, that she was going to be grounded for a week, and she wouldn't give her any chance to explain. So Donna went into her bedroom, very shocked and angry. She shut the door and lay on the bed, and then she just stared up at the ceiling, contemplating just what all had happened. And as she thought about it, she got angrier and angrier. She resented the fact that her brother left her with all the blame. She was angry with her mother, who didn't give her any chance to explain. She was angry that she got blamed for doing something that she didn't do, and she didn't get any credit for trying to be a good sister and help her little brother. So, as she was sitting there getting angrier and angrier, she heard a little faint tapping at her bedroom door. She sat up and sat on the edge of her bed. She said, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and her little brother slipped in. Timidly, he came up to her and said, "I know what you did for me. Thank you." And then he wrapped his arms around her and gave her a very firm hug. And then he said, "You're the best sister in the world," and gave her a gentle kiss on the cheek. Then he slipped out. It was like magic. All the anger, the feeling of being persecuted, vanished like a puff of smoke. And in its place, she started to feel something that you might even call pride. She thought, yeah, I did try to do the right thing. Okay, maybe I made some mistakes, but my heart was in the right place, and I was a good sister. And she felt from that point on that she was actually more than just a sister, something even better. She was his best friend.
Thank you, Walt. That was wonderful. Where did you get that story?
Oh, it's actually a story I used to use in my classroom. I had the kids read it. I embellished it a bit, but it's found in a book called Chicken Soup for the Kid's Soul.
Very cool. Great story. Okay, let's do spotlight. And now, see that. And Adrian said she doesn't have a story. So we're going to spotlight this computer. And I'm going to turn it around. And I think, Nick, you said you have a story? Sure. Okay, you can be next. Oh.
Now, this is a story from Tibet. And it was one I learned a long time ago, but I just haven't told it lately, and I just felt like telling it. You see, there were two men who had a lot in common. Forbu and Tenzin were both the last of their families, and they both came from families of farmers. And because they were each the last of their families, they ran their farms alone. But the fact was that Tenzin's family had left him good farmland, and he worked constantly, and so he did well with it. Forbu's land was terrible. He had trouble growing anything but rocks. He had cleared a little bit of land that he was able to use to plant vegetables enough for himself, but he could not grow enough to sell. And so to make money, he would climb up into the hills and cut wood. And use whatever he didn't use himself to occasionally go into the marketplace and sell a little bit of firewood. And so he eked out a living, while Tenzin did well for himself because he spent very little and made money. And, well, you know, having a wife or children would be expensive. And so he didn't have those to spend money on. And so he did very well for himself. But, you know, even when you're doing well, you always want more. Forbu had gone to different places up in the hills. And on one of his trips there to cut firewood, he discovered something very strange. There was a stone statue of a lion hidden in the brush up there. It had obviously been there for so long that the brush had grown up and completely covered it. And he thought to himself, well, this is unusual, but at least I won't be by myself when I'm up here cutting firewood. And so he began an unusual habit. He would take a little bit of the barley meal bread that he would make for his midday meal, and he would give it to the stone lion. And he would talk to it while he ate, and he would have little one-way conversations with the stone lion, because it never answered, of course, being a stone statue. But over time, it was, in many days, the only thing he ever talked to, because he only traveled into town to sell firewood when he had enough of that to sell. And so he was by himself so much of the time. And Tenzin was a neighbor, but not the friendliest neighbor, and so they rarely spoke. But the lion was always there to listen. And so he told the lion everything about his life and fed him his little scraps of barley bread every day that he was up there, until the strangest thing happened. One day, without warning, the lion said, "You've been very generous with your barley bread." Now, Furbu was not expecting that. First off, because it was a stone lion, and second, because it was thanking him for the most common food that anyone in the area had, because barley was the cheapest of grains, and make it into soft dough and cooking it into barley bread was the easiest thing for a cook who'd had no skill and not much time and not much money to spend. Well, this started an actual conversation, though, because the lion actually could speak. It just hadn't been speaking. And so they conversed. And finally, the lion said, "You have been so generous, even though I know you have little. What can I do for you?" And Furbu said, "I don't know of anything. I don't know what a stone lion can do for me." And the lion laughed, a deep, stony laugh, and said, "I'll bet you don't know this, but we magical stone lions are rich. I'll tell you what, if you come back tomorrow morning before dawn, I can open my mouth wide enough for you to reach inside, and I will let you take as much gold as you can pull out of my throat. Now bring a bag to carry it." Well, Furbu didn't know what to think of this, but the lion was clearly being kind and generous in its own way. And so early the next morning, he climbed up into the hills with a small bag, and the lion was there and said, "Ah, good, you're here. Now make sure you have your hand out of my mouth before the sun fully rises over the hills, because that's when I have to close my throat. And we could still talk, but your hand would be stuck there." And so he reached in, as the lion opened its mouth, he reached in, and sure enough, he reached in deeply and pulled out pieces of gold. Well, he quickly put those into his bag and reached in again and again, several times, until the little bag that he had was full. And the lion said, "You should have brought a larger bag. I could have given you more gold." And Furbu said, "No, this is enough for my needs." And still they conversed, and Furbu said, "I won't be back up here for a little while. I have things that I need to do that will take me away from you. But thank you so much, and I'll return again when I have the chance. And so Furbu went back in, down to his home, and into town, and he began looking around for several things. One was a carpenter to help him make a bigger house. He'd always wanted a little bit bigger house. And the second was, well, he was lonely and he was looking for a woman to become his bride, because now that he had gold, he could afford to have a bride. And so he found the carpenter, and eventually he found the bride. And so he came back, and his house was bigger, and it was full with two people instead of just one, before he ended up going back up to the hills. But Tenzin had seen the work fixing up of this house. How could Furbu afford this? He barely had money to pay for his food. He had to sell firewood to get that. And who was this beautiful young woman that he'd come back with? Surely he couldn't have found a way to afford a bride. Well, Tenzin was curious, because if Furbu had more money to afford a bride, that meant that somewhere there was more money to be had. And so he went to his friend, as he thought of himself, and Tenzin said, so how did you become relatively wealthy? And Furbu said, oh, you're not going to believe this. It was magic. What? Well, not exactly just magic. You see, I met a magical stone lion, and the stone lion gave me money. And Tenzin said, what? And so Furbu finally had the whole story teased out of him, and told the story about how he'd been talking to the stone lion for a long time. And finally the lion talked back, and the lion offered him money in return for the barley cakes that he'd given him. And it didn't make any sense, but Tenzin said, there's money involved with this somewhere. There has to be something in it. So he got from Furbu exactly the details of what he had done, and how long he'd done it for, and how to make the lion happy. And so, while Furbu was still settling into his new home with his new bride, and he'd had a little bit of money to clear some of the stones, so he was able to do a little more planting. Tenzin went up into the hills and found the statue of the lion, and began doing a little bit of wood cutting so that he would have an excuse to be nearby, but started speaking to the statue and giving it a little bit of barley bread. He could easily afford that. He ate better than that normally. And gradually, as the days turned to weeks and turned to months, the lion spoke to him in return. And he said, how may I reward you for being kind to me, for speaking to me and giving me of your barley bread? And Tenzin said, well, you rewarded my friend Furbu and said that there was a way to give him gold in return. That would always be welcome. And the lion said, bring a bag tomorrow, and I will let you fill it with gold. And so Tenzin went home and got a bigger bag than Furbu had shown him, and thought, this will make me rich, and went back up into the hills early the next morning. Oh, he hadn't gotten up that early in years, but he climbed up into the hills and went to the stone statue. And the lion said, now remember, you can only take the gold out of my throat until the sun fully rises over the hills. Then my throat will close. And Tenzin said, of course, of course, of course. And so the stone lion opened his mouth and opened his throat, and Tenzin began reaching in and pulling out the gold, and reaching in and pulling out the gold, and reaching in and pulling out the gold. He had a bigger bag Furbu had, so it took longer. And reaching in and pulling out the gold, and the lion said, you know, the sun is getting close to clearing the hills. Maybe you'd better stop. Oh no, just a couple of more handfuls. And reaching in and pulling out the gold, and reaching in, and the sun rose fully over the hill behind him. And at that instant, the lion's stone throat closed around his hand. Now, it's not certain how long he was up there because you see, the lion had never said when the next time he could open his throat would be. And because only Forbu and Tenzin ever went up into that hill, no one else was going to wander by quickly. And Tenzin yelled out as loudly as he could, but Forbu from his farm heard nothing. So, how long was he there? How long did his own greed make him stay there? We know that it was for a long time. And that we know that it was his own desire for gold. But we know that Forbu, with less need and with less greed, lived happily after that.
Thank you, Nick. That reminds me of the story about how much land does a man need, a Russian folktale that has a similar kind of greedy component to it. Anybody else have a story? Chris? Sure. And I have a short one.
This story is from Don Ketting.
Dan.
Dan Ketting's book. Get the name of it. It's from from Slovakia. And it's about a farmer who had 3 sons. And he worked hard and took good care of his sons even after his father passed. His sons, though, never really grew up, and they would laze around while their father did all the work, all the repairs on the house, preparing the food, everything, and they just hung out. And the neighbors criticized these boys and said, "Why don't you help your father?" "Oh, our father likes to. I don't need to." And eventually he worked himself to a death. And as he was lying on his deathbed, and his sons are gone to meet him. Anyway, he said, "Sons, I need to tell you a story. When your mother and I were first married, and I worked and she worked, and we had so much extra money, we put it in a jar. And then when you guys came along, we didn't have so much extra money. So we went ahead and just buried that, because we might need it someday. We buried the jar in the yard. And I don't remember exactly where we buried it, but I know it's somewhere either close to the house or out in the field. And I hope you guys find it so you can survive for a little bit longer, since you don't know how to do anything." And so then he died. And the brothers looked at each other, "What are we going to do?" And they just would keep eating the food that was in the house and drinking what was available. And then pretty soon there was nothing left. They had nothing to eat. And they were too. So they thought, well, let's dig up the yard and see if we can find that hole. And they did. They dug up the part close to the house where there was like a food garden. And they dug that up. They couldn't find the gold. So they moved on to the field and they dug up that entire field, not missing a single quarter inch. And they did not. And they were so disappointed. And they started talking, and one of them said, well, you know, we might as well go ahead and plant it. It's spring. We can plant it and see, you know, what can happen. And pretty soon, year after year, they planted the field, they planted the garden. Each of the sons got married. And one day, they were sitting together after a meal. And they started talking. You know, it seems like Dad did have
You know, my mind blanked for a split second. I lost, I'm sorry. I lost the, so sorry. No, so how, how was the golden?
So there wasn't gold coin,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah, okay.
it was a wise father
Who tricks his children.
tricked his children into learning how to work. And then once they had done it, they found it was all right.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
Okay, so I'm going to do something that's very, very cool. This book, Nuestro Pueblo, published in 1940, was apparently bought by my grandfather and grandmother when they moved to Ontario, California in 1946, probably because they wanted to. The book's about Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, from way back and kind of the history. And it's illustrated by a very famous illustrator. And so it has all these pages. This is an illustration I'm going to show here first of the Santa Anita train station, which was built in 1880. Santa Anita, yeah. And then with each illustration, there's a story that goes with it, a historical story. And so I think my grandparents bought this wanting to learn the history of Los Angeles, and maybe they could go visit some of these historical sites. And when my stepfather died in 2019, we cleaned out the house. And well, we thought we had, and then we hired an estate salesperson, and they cleaned everything, I mean, totally. But in the bedroom, the master bedroom, way in the back of the cupboard, there was still a whole bunch of books left, and this was one of them. And I pulled it out, and I found some other very interesting books, including my grandfather, my mother's father, was a Mason, and he had a book published in the 1880s of all the rules and customs of the Scottish Masons, which is interesting. So fast forward to this past weekend. I was in the San Bernardino Mountains, just outside of Running Springs, a place called Keller Ski Hut, which is right across from Snow Valley. You know where Snow Valley is. And it's owned by the Sierra Club. And I was doing a training, a field exercise, a map and compass field exercise for prospective Sierra Club hiking leaders. And I train them. I've been doing that since 2013. And we went up, the training was on Saturday. We went up on Friday and got a first aid training and had dinner. And then we were playing games and talking. And one of the people that I was talking with, her grandmother moved to Los Angeles like in the 1920s, and she was talking about what it was like. And that rung a bell in my head about this book, because it was published in 1940. It covered everything from very early to 1940. And the other person that was there were three of us that spent the night in the cabin. He looked up the book. I remembered the title. He looked it up on Amazon. He said, hey, that book's worth about $200. It's a rare book. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And so when I came back home, after the weekend, I started looking at it and I thought, well, I'm going to pick out a couple stories and tell you about them. And I really only had time to learn one. And it's a story about that Santa Anita train station that was built in the 1880s. So the title of the story is Lucky Baldwin. And he was called Lucky because he arrived in California during the gold rush days and penniless, and he ended up being a millionaire. I mean, it seemed like every venture he tried, he was successful at. He built a brick factory up there in Northern California and sold bricks for building buildings, and he had a store to sell things to gold rush people, and he invested in mines, and he did all kinds of things and made lots and lots of money. And then he moved to Southern California and decided to live there. And he bought this big Santa Anita Rancho, huge amount of property, and became famous for many things. For one thing, he loved horses and he raced thoroughbreds, and he had the Santa Anita racetrack built. And he also was kind of flamboyant. He was married 4 times. He was taken to court several times by women who said that he had promised to marry him and didn't. And in fact, in one of those court cases, while he was sitting there in court, a friend of the woman accusing him came up behind with a gun and tried to kill him, shot him and missed, just grazed his head. So he was lucky there that he didn't die. So quite a flamboyant character for sure, and not someone to mess with, which is what the little story in the book is about. So you see, he owned this large tract of land, right? Well, the Santa Fe Railroad built tracks through his property, and he had the Santa Anita train station built there in the 1880s, and he did not realize that a lot of the Santa Fe trains did not stop there. And when he found that out about 1900, and it had been 20 years.
Oh.
That because he wanted the train to stop there.
Yeah.
You know, it's good for development of the area to have a train stop that's active. And apparently not very many trains were stopping there. And so he was furious when he found out this had been kept from him, and he didn't know that. And so he contacted his superintendent foreman and said, get 200 men and dig up all the tracks that run through my property.
Oh no.
And they started doing that, and that got the attention of the Santa Fe, and the railroad gave in. And after that moment, every Santa Fe train stopped at the Santa Anita station except for the super chief, the one that really ran fast and made very few stops at all, because you don't mess with Lucky Baldwin. Yeah, so I'll pass this around. The illustrations are very interesting, and it's just like page after page after page of illustration with a little story about each landmark in Los Angeles.
Wow.
What was the name of the illustrator?
You look it up.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's in the front. But I think he was a famous illustrator.
There's drawings by Charles H. Owens.
Charles H. Owens. Does that ring a bell?
That sounds familiar.
Baldwin Avenue in Arcadia certainly sounds familiar.
Oh yeah, and Baldwin Park.
Baldwin Park. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. He had quite a few things named after him.
Well, there's the Lucky Baldwin's Tavern. It's right in front of you.
Yeah, Lucky Baldwin Tavern.
Bait.
They
This big fish.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's the end of the stories. Do you have any announcements to make, Nick?
Oh, a couple of things, actually. One is that the Storytellers of San Diego are participating in the Sam Hinton Folk Festival down in Poway. That's a week from Saturday, so June 1st. I've been down there for that festival, and it's a lot of fun. It's a one-day music and storytelling festival. The music is on the main stage, although this time Marilyn McPhee is also going to be telling stories. And then the property includes a couple of old houses that are in the old Poway Park there, and a thing that's, I'm not sure what it was originally, but it's used as a concert venue now. That hall is the one where San Diego Folk Heritage does a lot of its concerts, and that's where the dancing stuff happens at this festival. One of the houses is where the storytelling stuff happens, and then the bandstand area outdoors is where the rest of the music, except for the dance, happens. But it turns out there are a couple of other buildings on the site, including the local historical museum and a restaurant. And then on the day of the festival, it coincides with when they have their big farmers market. So there are tons of people there wandering in and out of the festival and the farmers market. And there's great food at that farmers market. Last year when I was there, one of the vendors was selling what they called fruit jerky. And it was seasoned dried fruit done in sheets.
Yeah, fruit
And-
leather.
Yeah, but they called it fruit jerky, and theirs was not flavored like anything else I'd ever tasted, like strawberry and peppers, things like that. Just like the pepper jellies you get at some of the.
Yeah.
Imagine that as a fruit leather, and that's the kind of thing that they had. So there was really cool stuff there, as well as some other merchants. But anyway, the festival itself runs from about 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon on the 1st. I'm going to be going down there because I think I may be the northernmost member of the Storytellers of San Diego.
Yeah.
But since I grew up down there, I like going down there for stuff. So I'll be telling with them at the Sam Hinton Festival on the 1st. Then on Mother's Day, they're doing a storytelling performance at the Twisted Horn in Vista. And that is the brew pub that does only hard ciders and meads.
Wait, didn't we already have Mother's Day?
Or no, sorry, for Father's Day.
Okay.
Because they did a thing on Mother's Day, but I helped them come up with a theme for the next one, which was the Father's Day, and we brainstormed the name of it at the Story Swap. So anyway, the Father's Day is going to be there at the Twisted Horn, and that is such a fun place to tell stories. It's an indoor space where these guys built this brew pub in an industrial park that is a very friendly, warm, nice place to just socialize. And one of the parts of it is a perfect space for storytelling. But anyway, so I'll be going down there for that. And there was something else. Oh, and for those of you who didn't know, there is a regular storytelling performance series in Glendale now.
Oh, really?
And that's the one that both Karen Golden and Vicki Uditz have performed at. Vicki was there last weekend, in fact. It looks like it's regularly the first Sunday of the month. And it's in this weird little street, kind of around the corner from where the Lemley Theater is in Glendale, on the north-south street, south of where that is. But it's this little place that it's easy to miss if you don't know that it's there, because it's this anonymous looking space that looks like somebody's parlor. And it is a nice place for storytelling. And a lot of the seating is actually on couches, because there are a couple of rows of couches there, as well as a bunch of chairs. And their emphasis seems to be personal storytelling. I've only been to it a couple of times, but it was a lot of fun.
How many people were you there?
I think it comfortably seats 30, 35 people. You could squeeze more in there, but it would be crowded if you got up to 50.
Are they getting that many people?
They're filling it. They're getting up to 30, 35 the 2 times I've been there.
And how long do they allow you to tell the stories?
If you're one of the scheduled tellers, there's a time set for that, but there's a drawing for a spot every time. And so you put your name in the hat, and if you're drawn, you get like a 5-minute slot at the end. And so it's kind of a fun thing. It's almost like a moth type of thing, but there's not a voting thing. There's not a reward thing. There's just the fun of the stories.
What's it called again?
That's the problem, because it's got this very miscellaneous name. And so I don't remember the name of the series, but it's on the street that's just east of Brand, in the block just north of Broadway on the west side of the street. And it's you have to be walking along there to see it, because if you're driving past there, you will not be able to tell that it's there. But if you're walking along there, it's like, huh, that's a really cool looking space. I wonder what it is.
Do
Oh,
they-
wait, that's the one I was looking for.
Do they have a website or any way to reach them or any way to?
I will try to find out for you and send John the word to send out, because I have not seen anything but Facebook announcements.
And on
Oh,
Facebook, what are they calling it?
Well, that's the problem, because it's been called 2 different things that I've seen so far. And I think it may be because the individual performance series has a name that is not the name of the venue.
Okay.
And so that's the problem. But it's hard to miss if you're walking along that block, because it's right there.
Whose Facebook page did you find out of
Well, the last time I got it from Vicky Uditz, the time before that, I got it from Karen Golden. And I don't think they called it the same thing,
it?
because I think Karen may have called it by the name of the place and Vicky may have called it by the series,
Mhm.
or the other way around.
It's outside.
No, it's indoors. It's indoors, and it would be about the size of most of this room if you took out the cases along the sides here. Although there actually is a bookcase along one of the walls, because it's that kind of a place.
Do we know
And-
what time is it?
It's, I think, 7 in the evening on the first Sunday. But again, you have to check with them to make sure they haven't done something strange with it, because it looks like the kind of place that just sort of wings it.
Interesting. Okay, well, thanks for sharing those things, Nick.
Mhm.
And I think we've lost our Zoom audience.
Uh-oh.
And so I'm going to stop the recording.
Los Angeles, the city of romance. I don't know that I would refer to it as the city of romance anymore.